There are promises we make to the people who raised us, promises we swear we'll never break. But what happens when those promises turn to dust, and the person who gave you everything is left with nothing but the memory of your voice? This is the story of an abandoned father, 7 children who vanished into their own lives, and a young stranger who discovered that sometimes family isn't about blood, it's about who shows up when everyone else has left. In the mountain village of San Rafael, where morning mist clings to the valley like a shroud, and the dirt roads remember every footstep that's ever crossed them, there lived an 85-year-old man named Mateo. His face was a roadmap of sacrifice, every line carved by sleepless nights, every wrinkle earned through decades of backbreaking labor. His home, a weathered structure of cracked wood and fading paint, stood at the edge of town like a monument to forgotten promises. The flowers in his yard still bloomed each spring, wild, untamed, as if nature itself refused to let this place die completely. Every single afternoon, without exception, Mateo sat in the same wooden chair on his porch. That chair knew him better than any person alive. It had memorized the curve of his spine, the weight of his bones, the rhythm of his breathing. From that chair, his eyes swept across the horizon, searching for something that never appeared. Dust clouds on the road, the silhouette of a familiar walk, the flash of a smile he hadn't seen in years. Anything. The villagers would pass by, their faces heavy with pity that felt like stones in their pockets.
"They're not coming back, Mateo," they'd whisper, gentle but insistent.
You've been waiting for 7 years. 7 years, but Mateo never responded to their kindness. He just kept staring at that road, clutching a yellowed envelope in his weathered hands, an envelope that had never been opened, never been read, but somehow commanded his entire existence. Inside that envelope was a letter from his eldest son, Ricardo. It had arrived years ago, back when hope still felt like oxygen instead of poison. Mateo refused to break the seal. He claimed he already knew what it said, knew it by heart, word for word, promise for promise. "Ricardo's coming back for me," he'd tell anyone who asked. He wrote it all down. He promised. The letter became his religion, his proof, his last thread, connecting him to a past that felt more real than his
present. But here's what Mateo never spoke about.
The weight that crushed his chest every night. When the village went dark and the
only sound was his own breathing, he had 7 children.
7 lives he'd shaped with his bare hands after their mother died, giving birth to the youngest. While other men in his position walked away, disappeared into new lives, abandoned their responsibilities like shedding old skin, Mateo stayed. He became father and mother both. He worked 3 jobs simultaneously: construction during the day, night security at the warehouse, weekend carpentry for anyone who'd pay. His hands bled.
His back screamed.
His body aged in dog years. But his children never went hungry. They never wore torn clothes. They never felt unwanted. One by one, as they grew, they left. First Ricardo, the oldest, who promised in a tearful goodbye that he'd return once he got settled in the capital. "Just give me time, Papa, I'll come back for you."
"I swear it on Mama's grave." Then Sophia, who hugged him tight and whispered, "This isn't forever."
"I'll make enough money and bring you to live with me. You'll see." Then the others, Manuel, Lucia, Carmen, Diego, little Gabriela. Each departure accompanied by promises that sounded like gospel truth in the moment, but dissolved like sugar in rain. The letters came regularly at first. Updates about new jobs, new apartments, new lives taking shape in distant cities. Then the letters became sporadic, then rare. Then they stopped entirely, as if his children had collectively decided that silence was easier than lies.
And Mateo, who had given them literally everything, his youth, his health, his dreams,
his very soul, was left with 5 stray cats and a sealed letter he couldn't bring himself to open. because opening it meant confronting a truth he wasn't ready to face. The cats didn't judge him. They curled against his legs on cold nights, their purring a small comfort in an ocean of absence. They were witnesses to his quiet grief, the kind of grief that doesn't scream but instead settles into your bones like arthritis, chronic and inescapable. But then something shifted. Something Matteo didn't notice at first, but everyone else in San Rafael saw clear as daylight. His shopping trips were getting smaller. His groceries were shrinking. Where he used to buy meat, vegetables, rice, milk, bread, enough to sustain a man who'd once been strong, now he bought 2 rolls and a tiny bottle of milk.
That's it.
2 rolls,
1 bottle, as if he decided he didn't deserve more than that.
as if feeding himself felt like a betrayal of the children who'd forgotten him. In the village plaza, where vendors sold their goods under faded awnings and the morning light painted everything gold, a 20-year-old named Daniel noticed. Daniel was the kind of young man every community needs: observant, kind without making a show of it, someone who saw problems and quietly worked to solve them. He carried produce baskets for the market, helped elderly neighbors fix broken fences, listened when people needed to talk. And he'd been watching Matteo for weeks, watching the slow dissolution of a man who'd once been a pillar of strength. One morning, as Matteo stood at the counter clutching his 2 rolls and small milk bottle, Daniel approached. The old man's eyes were distant, glazed over, as if his mind existed somewhere between memory and fantasy. His hands trembled slightly, not from age, but from malnutrition disguised as choice. "Everything all right, Don Matteo?" Daniel asked, his voice carrying genuine concern rather than performative sympathy. Matteo looked up slowly as if being pulled from underwater. For a moment their eyes met, and Daniel saw something that made his throat tighten. Resignation. Pure, distilled resignation. "I'm fine, son," Matteo replied, his voice barely louder than a whisper. "Just don't need much these days."
"My children don't visit anymore, so..." He trailed off, the unfinished sentence hanging in the air like smoke. Daniel's gaze fell to the yellowed envelope Matteo clutched alongside his meager purchases.
Everyone in San Rafael knew about that letter, the sealed promise, the unopened hope. Curiosity and compassion wrestled in Daniel's chest before he spoke again.
"That letter you always carry, why have you never opened it?"
Matteo's face transformed, just for a second, just a flicker, into something like pain mixed with stubborn faith. "It's from Ricardo, my oldest. He sent it before he left."
"In it, he promises to come back, to take me away from here, to give me a good life in my final years. I know what it says."
"I don't need to read it to know." His voice cracked on the last word. "I'm saving it for when he comes, so we can read it together." Daniel felt something break inside him. The logic didn't make sense. How could Matteo know the contents of a letter he'd never opened? But grief doesn't follow logic. Hope doesn't require reason. And Daniel understood suddenly and completely that opening that letter meant accepting a reality Matteo had spent 7 years avoiding. "Don Matteo," Daniel said carefully, "what if reading it helps you? What if there's information in there, a date, a plan, something specific that could give you real hope instead of this? This waiting?" Matteo closed his eyes. When he opened them, they were wet. "Maybe you're right, Daniel.
Maybe I should read it."
But not today. Not today." He paid for his 2 rolls and tiny bottle of milk, then shuffled out of the market, his body moving like it hurt to exist. Daniel couldn't let it go. That evening he sought out Don Salvador, the village baker who'd lived in San Rafael his entire 83 years. If anyone knew Matteo's full story, it was Salvador. Daniel found him closing up shop, flour still dusting his weathered hands. "Tell me about Don Matteo," Daniel said. "The real story, not the whispers. I need to understand." Salvador's eyes grew heavy with memory. He gestured to a wooden bench outside his bakery, and they sat as the sun began its descent behind the mountains. Mateo's wife Elena died 28 years ago, Salvador began. Complications during the birth of their youngest. In one moment, Mateo went from husband and father to single parent of 7 children, ranging from newborn to 15 years old.
You understand what I'm telling you?
Most men would have cracked, would have given the children to relatives, abandoned them to the system, run away to start over.
Not Mateo.
That man became superhuman. He took every job he could find, worked himself to the bone, sold everything he owned except that house and the clothes on his back. He raised those children by himself, fed them, clothed them, sent them to school, taught them right from wrong. He was their whole world. Daniel listened, his heart growing heavier with each word.
And they all left?
One by one, Salvador confirmed. Ricardo first, promising to return. Then the others followed, always with promises, always with assurances. The letters came for a while.
Updates, apologies, more promises.
Then silence. Complete, absolute silence.
And Mateo just
kept waiting, kept believing. That letter from Ricardo arrived 7 years ago, right before the letters stopped coming. He's been carrying it ever since, unopened, like it's sacred scripture. Why doesn't anyone tell him the truth? Salvador's expression turned sad.
What truth, Daniel?
That his children forgot him? That all his sacrifice meant nothing to them in the end? Would you want to be the one to destroy a man's last reason for getting out of bed in the morning? The question hung in the air, unanswerable. They sat in silence as darkness claimed the village, 2 men contemplating the cruelty of abandonment and the fragility of hope. The next day, Daniel made a decision that would change everything. He woke before dawn, counted the money he'd been saving for a new motorcycle, and instead used it to buy groceries, real food, substantial food, rice, beans, meat, vegetables, eggs, bread, milk. He packed it all into a basket and walked to Mateo's house, his heart pounding with nervous purpose. Mateo answered the door, looking confused, then suspicious. Then, when he understood, overwhelmed.
I can't accept this, the old man said, his voice breaking.
You've already done too much by caring. Don Mateo, Daniel said firmly but gently. You spent 3 decades making sure your children had everything.
Let someone do the same for you, please. Mateo's face crumpled.
He accepted the basket with trembling hands, tears streaming down his weathered cheeks. Thank you, he whispered. Thank you. But Daniel didn't stop there. Over the following weeks, he became a constant presence in Mateo's life. He brought food regularly. He fixed the front door that no longer closed properly. He patched the roof where rain had been seeping through. He painted the walls that had faded to grey. And most importantly, he sat with Mateo in that old wooden chair, keeping him company during the long afternoons of waiting. They didn't always talk. Sometimes silence was enough. The simple knowledge that you're not alone in the world can be more powerful than any words. Then came the day everything changed. Daniel arrived at Mateo's house to find the old man collapsed halfway out his front door, his face pale as death, sweat soaking through his shirt despite the cool morning air.
Don Mateo.
Daniel rushed to his side, fear spiking through his chest like ice. Mateo's breathing was shallow, labored. His eyes struggled to focus.
Daniel, he gasped, his voice barely audible. I'm not feeling well. I think my time is coming. Don't say that. I'll get the doctor. No. Mateo gripped Daniel's wrist with surprising strength. No doctors.
I need you to do something for me. Please, before I go, I need to know what the letter says. I've been too afraid all these years, but I can't die without knowing.
Read it to me, please. Daniel's hands shook as he retrieved the yellowed envelope from where Mateo always kept it, folded carefully in his shirt pocket, close to his heart.
The paper was soft with age, the seal weakened by years of handling. Daniel carefully opened it, unfolding the letter inside. His eyes scanned the words, and his heart shattered. Dear Papa, the letter began. I'm writing this to tell you something I should have said in person, but I'm too much of a coward.
I can't come back.
I found work in another country, better pay, better opportunities. I know I promised to return for you, but I need to think about my own future now. My siblings feel the same way. We've talked about it. We're all busy with our own lives. We don't have time to visit or take care of you.
I'm sorry, Papa. I hope you understand.
Maybe one day things will be different. Goodbye. Daniel stared at the words, each one a small cruelty. The accumulated weight of them an act of violence against everything Matteo had sacrificed. This wasn't a promise.
This was an abandonment notice.
This was goodbye disguised as temporary circumstance. Daniel's mind raced. Matteo was dying, literally dying, right in front of him. If Daniel read these words aloud, if he delivered this final betrayal, it might kill Matteo faster than whatever illness was consuming him. Sometimes truth is a weapon, and sometimes mercy requires lies. Daniel made his choice. He cleared his throat and began to read, but the words that came out weren't the words on the page. "Dear Papa," Daniel said, his voice steady despite the lie forming on his tongue. "I'm writing to apologize for the delay. Work has been difficult, and I've had some setbacks that prevented me from coming sooner.
But I want you to know I haven't forgotten you. I will never forget you.
I'm working on fixing my situation, and as soon as I can, I'm coming home.
I promise you, Papa. Very soon I'll be there.
Please wait for me just a little longer."
I love you.
"Your son, Ricardo," Matteo's face transformed. Color returned to his cheeks. His eyes brightened with tears of joy rather than pain.
I knew it, he whispered, his voice gaining strength. I knew my boy wouldn't abandon me.
"I told everyone."
I told the whole village.
"They didn't believe me, but I knew." He struggled to his feet, Daniel supporting him, and together they walked into the village center. Matteo held the opened letter like a trophy, showing it to anyone who would look. "See?" he told the shocked villagers.
"Ricardo's coming, he said so. My son is coming home."
Daniel watched from a distance, guilt and relief warring in his chest. He'd lied. He'd fundamentally lied to a dying man. But that lie had given Matteo something to live for, something to hope for, even if the hope was built on fiction. The villagers looked at Daniel, understanding passing between them without words. He approached Don Salvador first, pulling him aside.
"Don't tell him," Daniel pleaded.
"Don't anyone tell him the truth, please." Salvador studied the young man's face, then nodded slowly.
"I'll spread the word.
The whole village will protect him." And they did. Over the following weeks, something miraculous happened. Matteo's health, which had been failing, stabilized. Not because of medicine or divine intervention, but because he had a reason to keep living. He had hope again, real hope, the kind that makes your heart beat stronger. And the village, seeing Matteo's transformation, rallied around him. Don Salvador brought fresh bread daily. Doña Maria cooked meals and delivered them steaming hot. The carpenter fixed his fence. The seamstress mended his clothes. For the first time in 7 years, Matteo wasn't alone. He was surrounded by a community that had decided collectively that this man deserved better than abandonment. Daniel continued visiting daily, and their relationship deepened into something that resembled what Matteo had lost, the bond between father and son. They talked about life, about loss, about the choices we make and the consequences we bear. Matteo shared stories of Eleanor, of raising his children, of the man he used to be before waiting became his entire existence. And Daniel listened, bearing witness to a life that deserved to be remembered. But time, as it always does, ran out. The morning came when Daniel arrived to find Matteo lying in bed, his breathing shallow, his skin paper-thin and translucent in the dawn light. The old man's eyes opened when Daniel entered, and a weak smile crossed his face.
"Daniel," Matteo whispered.
"Come here, my boy." Daniel sat beside him, taking Matteo's frail hand in his own. "I need to tell you something," Matteo continued, each word an effort.
"I know what you did. I know you lied about the letter." Daniel's breath caught.
"Don Matteo, Shh, let me finish." Matteo squeezed his hand gently.
"I've known for weeks."
"I'm old, not stupid. But you know what?
That lie was the kindest thing anyone's ever done for me."
It gave me something I thought I'd lost forever, hope. Not hope that Ricardo would come, but hope that there was still goodness in this world. You showed me that family isn't about blood.
It's about who shows up. And you showed up, Daniel.
When my own children vanished, you appeared. You became the son I needed. Tears streamed down Daniel's face.
I'm sorry I lied. I just couldn't. Don't apologize for compassion, Matteo interrupted softly.
You gave me the greatest gift. You let me die, believing I mattered to someone. That's all any of us really wants, isn't it? To matter, to be remembered, to know our existence made a difference. His breathing grew more labored.
Take care of my cats, will you?
And tell the village thank you. Tell them an old fool learned that sometimes the family you choose loves you better than the family you're born with. Those were Matteo's final words. He closed his eyes, that gentle smile still on his face, and slipped away as peacefully as anyone could hope. Daniel sat with him for a long time, holding his hand, letting his grief pour out in waves. When he finally emerged from the house, the entire village had gathered. They'd known somehow that this morning would be Matteo's last. They stood in silence, a community united in honoring a man who'd been abandoned by his children, but embraced by strangers who became family. The funeral was attended by everyone in San Rafael. They buried Matteo on a hillside overlooking the road he'd watched for 7 years, as if even in death he could keep his vigil. And as they lowered him into the ground, Daniel placed the letter in the coffin with him. Not the real letter with its cruel goodbye, but a new one Daniel had written, filled with the love Matteo had deserved all along. In the years that followed, Daniel kept Matteo's 5 cats and his small house. He turned it into a community center where elderly villagers could gather, share meals, and ensure no one ever felt as alone as Matteo had. The wooden chair where Matteo used to sit remained on the porch, a reminder that sometimes waiting for the wrong people means missing the right ones who are already there. Here's what I want you to understand. We make promises to the people who raise us, and sometimes we break those promises without a second thought. But every abandoned parent, every forgotten sacrifice, every unfulfilled oath leaves a scar on the world. Matteo deserved better. He deserved the love he'd given so freely. And though his biological children failed him spectacularly, a stranger with no obligation whatsoever became the son Matteo needed. That's the paradox of family. Sometimes blood means nothing, and sometimes a lie told in love is truer than any honest abandonment. So here's my question for you, and I want you to really think about it. If you were Daniel, would you have told the truth, or would you have lied? Would you prioritize honesty even if it destroyed a dying man's last hope, or would you choose mercy over facts? There's no right answer, only the answer that lets you live with yourself. Drop your thoughts below because I genuinely need to know, is compassionate deception ever justified, or is truth sacred regardless of the cost? Hook Comparison Original. Hook. 7 children raised with sacrifice, a promise that they would never abandon him, but it was all a lie. Don Justo, at 85 years old, spent his days gazing at the dusty road from his old house, waiting for the return of those who had sworn to come back. New hook. There are promises we make to the people who raised us, promises we swear will never break. But what happens when those promises turn to dust and the person who gave you everything is left with nothing but the memory of your voice? This is the story of an abandoned father, 7 children who vanished into their own lives,
and a young stranger who discovered that sometimes family isn't about blood. It's about who shows up when everyone else has left. Why it works.
The new hook immediately creates moral discomfort by forcing listeners to confront broken promises, something universally anxiety-inducing. It poses implicit questions. What promises? What happened? While establishing emotional stakes before revealing plot details. The phrase "memory of your voice" is viscerally haunting, and the tension between biological family and chosen family creates immediate curiosity about resolution.